The Venlathi Military Academy orbited a gas giant in the Kepler 442 system, a gleaming testament to 10,000 years of what the galaxy's elder races like to call proper civilization. The station itself was an architectural marvel, all sweeping curves and crystalline observation decks, designed by the Venlathi, who believed that warriors should be trained in beauty so they might remember what they fought to preserve. Philosophical nonsense, really. But it certainly photographed well for the recruitment holos. Inside this monument to refined violence, approximately 4,000 cadets from 63 different species learned the art of modern warfare, which, in the current galactic climate, mostly meant learning how to operate weapon systems from behind 6 feet of ablative armor, while your ship's AI did the actual fighting. Wars in the 29th century were clean affairs, fought across millions of kilometers of space, where casualties were measured in decimal points, and the most gruesome injury one might sustain was a paper cut from poorly printed duty rosters. The Academy prided itself on accepting only the finest specimens from each member species of the Galactic Concordance. Physical prowess, mental acuity, tactical genius, these were the hallmarks of a Venlathi cadet. The selection process was brutal. The washout rate exceeded 70%. Those who graduated could expect positions of significant authority in their respective militaries, assuming their respective militaries bothered having militaries anymore, which most didn't, because why would you, when you could just pool resources into the Concordance defense fleet and let someone else do the dying? Not that anyone really died anymore. Modern warfare was terribly safe. Into this sterile, efficient, and entirely predictable environment, humanity had recently inserted itself like a wrench into well-oiled machinery. The Terran Commonwealth, having achieved FTL capability a mere 37 years prior, had petitioned for Concordance membership with all the diplomatic grace of a species that had spent 10,000 years fighting itself and only recently decided to export that particular talent. The Concordance, after much debate, had granted them probationary status, which was political speak for, "We're not entirely convinced you won't eat the other delegates, but we'll give you a chance to prove otherwise." As part of this probationary status, Earth was permitted to send cadets to Venlathi Academy. Not many, the quota was deliberately small, but enough to evaluate whether humans could be trusted with the advanced weaponry and tactical knowledge that Concordance membership would provide. This is where our story finds its principal characters, though calling Cadet Thex'ilor a character suggests more depth than he actually possessed. Thex'ilor was Krynathi, a species whose entire cultural identity revolved around having once conquered 14 star systems before the Concordance politely asked them to stop or be glassed from orbit. The Krynathi had chosen to stop, which their propagandists later spun as strategic pacifism, but which everyone else understood as, "We did the math, and it wasn't even close." Still, the Krynathi maintained their warrior traditions, their elaborate honor codes, and their deeply annoying habit of referring to every other species as soft flesh. At 7 feet tall, with chitinous plating covering most of his body and 4 arms that he'd spent his entire life learning to use in synchronized combat, Thex'ilor represented the Krynathi ideal. He was fast, strong, and absolutely convinced of his own superiority. His test scores placed him in the top 15% of his class. His combat simulations were flawless. His tactical assessments earned commendations from instructors who'd seen 3 centuries of cadets pass through their classrooms. He was also, though this hadn't yet become apparent to him, spectacularly stupid. The human cadet who would soon demonstrate this fact went by the name of Marcus Chen, though he answered to just about anything if you said it loud enough. Marcus stood at an entirely unremarkable 5'10", possessed an entirely unremarkable athletic build, and had the kind of face that you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. Brown hair, brown eyes, a slight scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood mishap involving a bicycle, and a spectacularly poor understanding of momentum. He'd arrived at the academy 3 months prior, along with 2 other human cadets who'd been distributed to different training battalions. The academy administrators, in their infinite wisdom, had decided that clustering deathworlders together might be unnecessarily provocative, so they'd separated them. Marcus had thus found himself as the only human among 372 cadets from 40 different species, most of whom regarded him with the kind of cautious interest usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. The first few weeks had been awkward. Marcus's bunkmate, a methane-breathing Thex'ilor who required an entirely separate atmospheric system, had filed 3 separate requests for reassignment before finally accepting that the human wasn't going to spontaneously combust or start biting people. The Thex'ilor's name was unpronounceable in any oxygen-based language, so Marcus called him Tim. And Tim had eventually decided this was acceptable. Combat training had raised eyebrows. Marcus wasn't the strongest cadet. That honor belonged to a Dravix, whose species had evolved in 3.2 gravity, and could bench press a small hovercar. He wasn't the fastest. The stealthy moved like liquid mercury and could cross 100 meters in under 4 seconds. But there was something about the way Marcus moved, something that made the instructors exchange meaningful glances and update their notes with increasing frequency. He never stopped. That was the thing. During endurance training, when other cadets were gasping in their respective atmospheric mixtures and requesting breaks, Marcus just kept going. Not dramatically, not making a show of it. He just continued at a steady, relentless pace that made the monitoring staff check his biometrics to ensure he wasn't having some kind of medical episode. His heart rate isn't even elevated, one instructor had muttered, watching Marcus complete his 6th kilometer. Maybe the sensors are malfunctioning, another had suggested. They were not malfunctioning. In hand-to-hand combat, Marcus had been carefully placed against opponents of similar mass and strength, per Academy regulations. He won approximately 60% of his matches, which was perfectly respectable. What was less respectable, at least from the perspective of cadets who lost to him, was how he won. Marcus fought with an economy of motion that suggested he'd internalized violence at some fundamental level. No wasted movement, no theatrical flourishes, just brutal efficiency that ended matches in seconds. After one particularly swift victory against a Venlathi cadet who'd been talking about his 3 championship titles in some regional combat sport nobody else cared about, the instructor had pulled Marcus aside. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Marcus had shrugged. "Grew up in Seattle, took some classes." "Some classes?" "Yeah. Boxing, mostly. Little bit of judo. My mom made me do taekwondo when I was 8, but I didn't really stick with it." The instructor had stared at him for a long moment. "You're telling me that casual recreational combat training on your homeworld produces this level of proficiency?" "I mean, I'm not that good," Marcus had said, with what appeared to be genuine modesty. "I've got a buddy back home who competed professionally. Guy would absolutely destroy me." The instructor had made another note. A long one. This brings us, finally, to Thex'ilor's catastrophic error in fact, judgment. The Krynathi cadet had been watching Marcus with increasing irritation for weeks. It wasn't personal. Initially, Thex'ilor regarded most of his fellow cadets with varying degrees of contempt, but there was something about the human that particularly grated on him. Maybe it was the way other cadets had started giving Marcus a wider berth after seeing him in training. Maybe it was the fact that instructors had stopped making jokes about the Deathworlder and started treating him like any other cadet. Maybe it was just that Thex'ilor had built his entire identity on being the most dangerous being in any room, and Marcus's presence suggested that might not be true. Whatever the reason, Thex'ilor had decided that the human needed to be reminded of his place, and where better to deliver that reminder than in the communal dining facility in front of 300 witnesses. The cafeteria was a marvel of engineering, capable of preparing and serving appropriate nutrition for dozens of different biological requirements simultaneously. One section served foods in methane atmosphere, another was kept at temperatures that would boil water. A third was essentially a large tank of nutrient-rich liquid for species that didn't exactly eat in the traditional sense. It was organized chaos, and it was in this environment that Thex'ilor made his move. Marcus had been sitting alone, working his way through something that looked like pasta, but was actually a protein-rich synthetic designed to meet human nutritional requirements while being producible from the station's matter compilation system. He had a datapad propped against his tray, reviewing tactical scenarios for next week's examination. Thex'ilor approached with 3 of his fellow Krynathi cadets, a small entourage to witness what he assumed would be his dominance display. Deathworlder, Thex'ilor announced, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat concordant standard. Marcus looked up. "Hey, Thex'ilor, right? You sit in the warriors section." Marcus glanced around. The cafeteria had no designated sections beyond the atmospheric and environmental divisions. "I'm sitting in the oxygen breather section, yeah." "You mistake my meaning." Thex'ilor leaned forward. 2 of his arms braced against the table. "This table. The seats here. They are claimed by warriors. You are." He paused, his mandibles clicking in what his species considered a smile. Soft. Several nearby cadets had stopped eating. This was the kind of confrontation that everyone pretended to ignore while paying absolute attention to. Marcus set down his fork. "Look man, I'm just trying to eat lunch. There's plenty of other tables." "You misunderstand again, soft flesh. I am not asking you to move. I am telling you that you do not belong in the presence of true warriors." "Okay," Marcus said, picking his fork back up. "Noted." The dismissal was too much for Thex'ilor's pride. One of his hands shot out and swatted the fork from Marcus's grip, sending it clattering across the table. "You will acknowledge me when I address you." Marcus took a slow breath. Around them, the cafeteria had gone very quiet. "I acknowledged you. I said, okay. What else do you want?" "I want you to understand your place. You come from a backwards world, from a species that has achieved nothing, and you think you can stand among warriors." Thex'ilor's translator was clearly struggling with some of his more colorful idioms. "You are prey pretending to be predator." "I'm not pretending anything," Marcus said, his voice still level. "I'm just trying to graduate." One of Thex'ilor's friends clicked something that the translator rendered as laughter. Encouraged, Thex'ilor continued. "Your world is not even class 4. We studied the reports. Gravity so weak we could leap buildings, atmosphere so thin we would barely notice it. And yet you call it a death world, as if surviving there is an unfeated accomplishment. My larvae train in harsher conditions." "Cool," Marcus said, reaching for his water. Thex'ilor's hand intercepted it, knocking the container away. It splashed across the table. "You will not ignore me." "I'm not ignoring you. I'm just not interested in whatever this is." Marcus stood, preparing to leave. That was when Thex'ilor made his mistake. He grabbed Marcus's shoulder with one of his lower arms, spinning the human back around. "We are not finished, soft flesh." "You need to learn." Marcus's hand came up, not aggressively, just moving Thex'ilor's arm off his shoulder. It was a gentle gesture, really. Perfunctory. Thex'ilor interpreted it as a challenge. His combat training, hundreds of hours refined over years of practice, took over. He saw an opening. He saw a soft, unarmored target standing at perfect striking distance. He saw his moment to demonstrate, definitively, the natural hierarchy of species. Thex'ilor threw a punch at Marcus's face with every ounce of force his warrior caste physiology could generate. The sound it made was wrong. Not the impact sounded exactly like you'd expect a fist hitting a human face to sound like, which was to say, unpleasant. No, the wrong sound came a microsecond later, a sort of crunching, splintering noise that made everyone within earshot wince in sympathetic pain. Thex'ilor screamed. Marcus staggered backward, his hand going to his jaw, which was already swelling. There was blood, human blood, bright red and entirely too much of it, but he was standing, conscious, looking more surprised than hurt. Thex'ilor was not standing. He'd fallen to his knees, his right arm held at a twisted angle that should not have been anatomically possible for a Krynathi. The chitinous plating along his forearm had cracked in 3 places. One of his smaller bones, the anterior striking bone, used specifically for combat, had snapped completely and was protruding through the chitin at an angle that made several cadets look away. "What the?" Marcus started to say, then saw Thex'ilor's arm and went pale. "Oh God! Why did you do that?" Thex'ilor wasn't listening. He was making a high-pitched keening sound, his other 3 arms clutching at the broken one, his entire body trembling. One of his friends had rushed forward, babbling into a communicator. The other 2 just stood there, staring in disbelief. The cafeteria had erupted into chaos. Cadets were standing, some rushing closer, others backing away. Someone with medical training, a Thex'ilor nurse who'd been eating 3 tables over, had grabbed a nearby tablecloth and was trying to figure out how to stabilize a Krynathi arm. Marcus just stood there, one hand still on his jaw, looking utterly baffled. "I didn't even hit him," he said to nobody in particular. "He hit me." The medical team arrived in under 90 seconds, which was impressive given that they had to navigate 3 levels and 2 transport tubes. They came in with a hover stretcher and emergency medical kits designed for a dozen different species. The lead medic, a Venlathi with 30 years of experience, took one look at Thex'ilor's arm and actually stopped walking. "What happened to him?" "He punched the human," someone said. The medic's eyes went to Marcus, who was now sitting down while another cadet pressed a cold compress to his face. The medic's expression did something complicated. "He punched the human." "Yes. And the human did this to him." "The human didn't do anything," the Thex'ilor nurse interjected. "The Krynathi struck first. The human just stood there." The medic processed this for a moment, then moved to Thex'ilor with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested he was filing this away to think about later. They administered pain suppressors, a lot of them, and carefully loaded the Krynathi onto the stretcher. The broken arm was stabilized with a field splint that kept it immobile. As they were preparing to leave, the medic turned to Marcus. "You, come with us." "I'm fine," Marcus said, though his jaw was now the size of a small fruit and had turned a spectacular shade of purple. "That wasn't a request, Cadet. Medical evaluation." Now, the medical bay was as advanced as everything else on the station, all gleaming surfaces and equipment that hummed at frequencies most species couldn't hear. They put Thex'ilor in a surgical suite and wheeled Marcus into an examination room. A medical scanner swept over him, feeding data to displays that the attending physician studied with increasing concern. "Your mandible is fractured in 2 places," the physician said. She was Venlathi, with a kind of calm demeanor that came from years of delivering bad news. "You have a concussion, minor, soft tissue damage to your face and jaw. And your teeth, 3 of them, are cracked." "Great," Marcus said, or tried to say. It came out more like great because talking hurt. "You're remarkably intact considering," the physician continued. She gestured to the display. "A strike of that force should have, by all calculations, caused catastrophic damage to your facial structure. Multiple fractures, possibly fatal hemorrhaging. The fact that you're sitting here making sarcastic responses is..." She paused, searching for a word, "notable." "How's Thex'ilor?" Marcus managed. "Cadet Thex'ilor is in surgery. His arm will require reconstruction. 3 bones shattered, 2 joints dislocated, extensive tissue damage. He'll recover, but it will take weeks, even with our medical technology." She studied Marcus with open curiosity. "Do you understand what happened?" "He hit me." "He hit you," she confirmed, "with enough force to defeat a light combat barrier. And your face, apparently, was harder than his entire forearm structure." Marcus blinked his one eye that wasn't swollen shut. "That's not. I mean, I'm not that tough. I'm just a regular guy." The physician made a note. "Tell me, Cadet Chen, what is the standard gravity on Earth?" 1 g, standard. "And the atmospheric pressure at sea level?" 101.325 kilopascals. "Why?" "The Krynathi homeworld has a gravity of 0, 7 g. Atmospheric pressure roughly 30% lower than Earth's." She pulled up a comparison chart. "Your bone density is approximately 40% higher than his. Your muscle fiber is denser. Your skeletal structure is reinforced to handle significantly greater stress loads. Do you understand what I'm telling you? That I'm built different?" Marcus said, then winced because even joking hurt. "That your entire species is built different. You evolved on what you call a normal world. The rest of us evolved on what are, by comparison, low-pressure, low-gravity environments. When Cadet Thex'ilor struck you, It was the equivalent of punching a bulkhead and expecting it to yield. I'm not a bulkhead. You might as well be, from his perspective. She turned off the display. I'm going to treat your injuries. You'll be on soft foods for a week while your jaw heals. No strenuous activity for 3 days. And I'm going to recommend to the commandant that new safety protocols be implemented for human cadets in physical altercations. I didn't start it, Marcus protested. No, the physician agreed, but you certainly finished it, even if you didn't mean to. The news spread through the academy faster than light speed, which was appropriate for a military installation. By the time Marcus was released from medical, every cadet in the facility knew what had happened. The story had been embellished. Naturally, some versions had Marcus breaking Thex'ilor's arm intentionally, with some kind of devastating martial arts technique. Others suggested he'd headbutted the Krynathi's fist, which was closer to the truth but sounded ridiculous. The commandant's office was as imposing as expected, all dark wood and displays showing various battle honors the academy had earned over the centuries. Commandant Velthora was Venlathi, ancient even by her species' standards, and had the kind of gaze that suggested she'd seen every kind of foolishness multiple times and had long since run out of patience for it. Marcus stood at attention in front of her desk, his face still bandaged. Thex'ilor, released from medical with his arm in a regenerative cast, stood 3 feet away, looking anywhere but at the human. I have reviewed the surveillance footage, Velthora said, her voice like gravel being sorted. Multiple angles, full audio, and I have read the medical reports for both of you. She leaned back in her chair. Cadet Thex'ilor, you initiated physical violence against a fellow cadet in a non-training environment. This is grounds for expulsion. Thex'ilor's mandibles clicked in distress. Commandant, however, she continued, I am not going to expel you. Do you know why? No, Commandant. Because you have already suffered consequences that I suspect will be far more educational than any formal punishment I could administer. She gestured to his arm. You will carry that cast for 3 weeks. You will be unable to participate in combat training for 5 weeks. Your cohort will advance without you. You will make up the missed work on your own time. And for the rest of your life, whenever someone asks you about that injury, you will have to explain that you broke your arm on a human's face. Thex'ilor said nothing. As for you, Cadet Chen, Velthora turned her attention to Marcus. You showed admirable restraint in not retaliating. However, you also need to understand something. Your species is dangerous. Not because you're aggressive, the footage shows you actively trying to de-escalate. Dangerous, because you're durable in ways that others are not. If you had struck back, even defensively, you could have killed Cadet Thex'ilor. I wouldn't, Marcus started. You might not mean to, that's what makes it dangerous. She pulled up a holographic display showing comparative physiology. Look at this. This is a Krynathi skeletal structure, and this is human. Do you see the difference in bone density? In muscle attachment points? Your species evolved to survive on a world that would hospitalize most of us within days. You are, in the most literal sense, built to endure what would destroy us. Marcus looked at the display, then at Thex'ilor, then back at the commandant. So what do I do? You remember. Every time you interact with another species, you remember that you are operating with a margin of safety that they don't have. You pull your punches, metaphorically and literally. You accept that what feels like normal exertion to you might be crushing force to them. She deactivated the display. Both of you are dismissed. Cadet Thex'ilor, report to the training coordinator to discuss your remedial schedule. Cadet Chen, you're cleared to return to regular duties once medical releases you. They left together, awkwardly, and walked down the corridor in silence for a full minute before Thex'ilor spoke. I did not know, he said quietly. Neither did I, Marcus admitted. I mean, I knew Earth was a little heavier than average, but I didn't think it mattered that much. It matters. Thex'ilor looked at his cast. My instructors, my clutchmates, everyone told me that Krynathi were warrior caste, superior, and I believed it because I have trained my entire life, and I was good at what I did. You are good at what you do, Marcus said. Your combat scores are way better than mine. In simulations, against opponents whose physiological limitations match my own. Thex'ilor made a sound that might have been bitter laughter. Do you know what my biggest fear was before coming here? That I would not be strong enough. That I would fail to live up to the warrior traditions of my people. And now I know that strength is relative. That I have been training to fight enemies who do not exist, against threats that evolved in environments like mine. He stopped walking, turning to face Marcus. Your species terrifies me, Chen. Not because you are aggressive, but because you are not. Because you walk among us acting as if you are normal, as if you are just another cadet, when in reality you are. He struggled for the word. On something else. I'm not something else. Marcus protested. I'm just a guy. You are just a guy who can survive injuries that would kill me. Who can endure exertion that would hospitalize me. Who can, without even trying, without even intending harm, break my bones by standing still. Thex'ilor's translator conveyed something that might have been respect, or might have been fear, or might have been both. Do you understand what that means to warriors like me? We have spent generations perfecting the art of violence, and then you arrive from your death world and render all of it obsolete simply by existing. Marcus didn't have a response to that. What could he say? That he was sorry for being human? That he'd try to be more fragile in the future? They continued walking in silence until they reached the junction where their paths diverged. Thex'ilor paused. For what it is worth, Chen, I apologize. I let pride override wisdom. I saw you as a threat to my identity, and I responded poorly. I accept your apology, Marcus said. And for what it's worth, I hope your arm heals up okay. Thex'ilor nodded and turned down his corridor. Marcus watched him go, then headed back to his own quarters, where Tim was waiting with approximately 300 questions. The incident had ripples. Command staff started quietly updating their threat assessments of human capabilities. New protocols were discussed regarding physical training with Deathworld species. Several cadets who'd previously dismissed Marcus started giving him a much wider berth, while others approached with newfound curiosity, bordering on morbid fascination. Marcus hated all of it. He joined the academy to learn, to prove that humanity could contribute meaningfully to the concordance, not to become some kind of walking hazard warning. He attended classes, completed his assignments, and tried very hard to pretend that everyone wasn't talking about him. 2 weeks after the incident, during a tactical simulation, Marcus found himself paired with a Venlathi cadet named Krynathi for a shipboarding scenario. They were supposed to clear a hostile vessel of enemy combatants, all simulated, of course in under 10 minutes. They moved through the virtual corridors efficiently, Krynathi handling ranged targets while Marcus took point. At one junction, 3 simulated enemies emerged. Marcus moved without thinking, crossing the distance in 3 strides, his simulated combat knife taking down 2 targets while his other hand deflected a weapon. Krynathi handled the third with a well-placed shot. The simulation ended. Time, 7 minutes, 34 seconds. Well above average. Krynathi stared at him. How did you move that fast? I just ran? You crossed 8 meters in under 2 seconds. While armored, on a ship deck with 0.7 g gravity. Krynathi replayed the simulation. I have trained for years to move half that efficiently. I mean, I did track in high school, Marcus offered weakly. Track. Running. Competitive running. It's a sport. You have a sport, Krynathi said slowly, where you compete to see who can run fastest. Yeah? Lots of sports are about running. Soccer, basketball, football. All of your recreational activities involve skills that would make you elite soldiers in our militaries. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. When put that way, it did sound kind of bad. The story somehow got worse when, 3 weeks later, during a cross-training exercise with the Academy's orbital drop specialists, Marcus casually mentioned that he'd been skydiving a few times back on Earth. For recreation, he'd added, seeing their expressions. You jump out of aircraft for fun, the drop specialist instructor said, with the tone of someone trying to understand an alien concept. Well, yeah. I mean, you have a parachute. We have parachutes too. And gravitic dampeners. And emergency teleport beacons. And medical teams on standby. And you're telling me your species does this with just a parachute? Sometimes people do it without parachutes, Marcus said, then immediately regretted it when the instructor's face went through several interesting colors. I mean, wingsuits, they're a thing. You glide down. It's totally safe if you know what you're doing. Totally safe, the instructor repeated. Marcus decided to stop talking about Earth recreational activities after that. By the end of term, the dynamic at the academy had shifted in ways subtle and not so subtle. Humans were no longer dismissed as backward newcomers. They were watched, carefully, with the kind of attention you'd give to something that might explode if handled incorrectly. It wasn't fear, exactly, more like a recalibration of assumptions. The two other human cadets, who'd been having their own interesting experiences in their respective battalions, met up with Marcus during a leave period. They compared notes over something approximating coffee in one of the station's recreation areas. So a Dravex challenged me to a strength competition, one of them said. Her name was Rachel Coe, and she'd been an amateur powerlifter before joining the academy. Big guy, probably twice my mass, evolved in 3.2 g gravity. How'd it go? Marcus asked. I beat him. Not by much, but I beat him. He's been avoiding me ever since. She sipped her not coffee. I think I broke his worldview. I accidentally sent someone to medical, the third human said. His name was James Wright, and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. During a grappling exercise, the instructor said to use 50% force. Apparently my 50% and their 50% are very different things. Yeah, Marcus said, touching his jaw, which had healed but still ached in cold weather. I'm getting that sense. They sat in silence for a moment, three humans trying to figure out how to exist in a galaxy that had very different ideas about what normal meant. My mom asked me if I was making friends, Rachel said eventually. What did you tell her? That everyone's very polite and professional and maintains a respectful distance at all times. So no. So definitely no. The term ended with final examinations, both practical and theoretical. Marcus scored in the top 20% of his class, which was respectable but not outstanding. Thex'ilor, having made up his missed work and trained with almost obsessive intensity, managed to graduate with his cohort despite his injury. They didn't become friends, exactly, but they developed a mutual respect built on the understanding that pride was less valuable than wisdom. At the graduation ceremony, Commandant Velthora gave a speech about honor and duty and the responsibility of warriors to use their abilities wisely. It was standard stuff, the kind of speech given at every military academy across every species. But this year, she added a new section. This term has been educational in unexpected ways, she said, her gaze sweeping across the assembled cadets. We have learned that our assumptions about strength, about durability, about what constitutes a threat, were based on limited data. We have learned that the galaxy is more diverse than we imagined, and that diversity extends beyond culture and technology into the fundamental structure of how different species exist. She paused, and Marcus could swear she was looking directly at him. Some of you learned these lessons gently, through instruction and study. Others learned them more directly. But all of you, I hope, have gained wisdom from the experience. The universe does not care about our pride or our assumptions. It simply is. And we must adapt to it, or be broken by it. After the ceremony, as cadets were celebrating and preparing to depart for their various assignments, Thex'ilor approached Marcus one final time. I have been assigned to a cruiser in the Outer Rim, the Krynathi said. Border patrol duties. Quiet work, most likely. Sounds nice, Marcus said. Where are you being assigned? Ground forces. Apparently they want humans for planetary operations. Marcus shrugged. Makes sense, I guess. We're good at existing on planets. Yes, Thex'ilor agreed. You are. He extended his hand, the one that had been broken, in the human gesture of respect he'd learned. Marcus shook it carefully. I hope we do not meet in combat, Chen. Why's that? Because if I am ever unfortunate enough to face humans in actual warfare, it will mean that the Concordance's diplomatic corps has failed catastrophically, and we will all have much larger problems than individual duels of honor. Marcus laughed. Fair point. They parted ways, two warriors from vastly different worlds, both carrying knowledge that would shape their careers. Thex'ilor would go on to become an excellent officer, known for his ability to accurately assess threats and his refusal to underestimate opponents based on appearance. Marcus would serve with distinction in ground operations, where his ability to just keep going when everyone else was exhausted proved invaluable. Years later, when the Concordance first encountered an actually hostile Deathworld species, not humans, but something worse, something that had evolved on a world with crushing gravity and toxic atmosphere, and predators that made Earth's wildlife look tame. It was Thex'ilor who recommended that humanity be brought in as consultants. They will understand how to fight enemies like this, he'd said in the strategy briefing. Because they are enemies like this. And when human ground forces had faced those hostile Deathworlders and won through a combination of stubbornness, adaptability, and the kind of casual violence that came from evolving on a planet that was actively trying to kill you, the rest of the Concordance had finally, truly understood what the Academy had learned years earlier. Humans weren't special because they were smarter or more advanced. They weren't even special because they were particularly aggressive, which they weren't by Deathworld standards. They were special because they were built to survive on a world that would hospitalize most spacefaring species within days, and they considered that world moderate and temperate and a nice place to raise children. The galaxy had spent 10,000 years building a civilization among species that evolved in relatively righted, gentle environments. They'd created their concept of warfare, of strength, of what it meant to be dangerous, based on those parameters. And then humanity had shown up and revealed that all of those parameters were far more flexible than anyone had imagined. The Venlathi Military Academy updated its training protocols. New guidelines were issued regarding cross-species physical contact. Medical facilities were upgraded with equipment